The big look at me cursive handwriting in her letter triggers me. I found the letter in a box of old documents about the case. It reminds me of why I, a private investigator in the Bay Area, fired her as a client nearly 3 decades ago. But she, and her involvement in the death of her granddaughter's father, continues to eat at me to this day. In my line of work, you learn to judge a person's character by the way they act. The grandma, as I'll call her because she's never been officially criminally charged in this case, hired me and my former partner, John Nazarian. She initially retained our services by paying us in cash that she retrieved from a Ritz cracker box in the freezer. But we learned early on we had the wrong client, and we broke it off. We did so, luckily, 3 months before she may have hired at least 2 San Quentin ex-cons in a plot to gun down Gary Murphy, the father of her 6-year-old grandchild, Eden. This all took place 25 years ago to the day. Despite all of that time, I remember it well. I work strange cases as a private investigator. Ugly family law cases, wrongful death, civil matters, and criminal defense for obviously guilty violent clients. But the broad daylight killing of Gary Murphy at a halfway house in San Francisco on June 12, 1998, was the only time someone had killed the subject I once had under surveillance. This is a story of role reversal, of busted stereotypes. Turns out the felonious drug-dealing biker Murphy, the son of a D-Day World War II hero, was a decent guy. He cleaned himself up, was sober for a year, and managed the halfway house he lived at as he tried to get full custody of his daughter, Eden. As for Grandma, behind the prim and proper image topped by a curly blonde perm, was a psychopath who paid for dirty work. This is episode 3 of the Gary Murphy Assassination podcast. I am your host, Mike Spencer, and I am uniquely qualified to bring this series to you. Before I became a private investigator in early 1997, I worked for about a decade as a reporter covering police and breaking news for dailies in Virginia, California, and Florida. I earned a degree from UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism. I am the author of Private Eye Confidential, Stories from a Real PI, published by 99 The Press. For this series, I draw from my experience obtaining public records, interviewing witnesses, and weighing the credibility of evidence. Plus, I have lived with this case for more than 25 years since I'm a witness in it, and have tried to keep it from slipping away forever from the public eye. This series is my call for justice and for police accountability. If you haven't listened already, episode 1 gives an overview of the case and why I took on my investigation into initially what looked like a cold case. I first thought there was a possibility that Murphy's criminal past had caught up with him and that my former client might be innocent. In episode 2, I lay out the reasons why Grandma and at least 2 other men, possibly 3, are the prime suspects in the uncharged homicide. In that episode, I also reported, for the first time, that 2 of the men in the Murphy plot also perpetrated a home invasion and sex assault of a pregnant Piedmont woman a week after the Murphy slaying. I obtained the San Francisco Police and Alameda County District Attorney's Office records that name Grandma and the other suspects. But, since none of them has been charged in the case, I am not giving their true names in this podcast. Legally, I could. I suppose it's a matter of fairness that I don't name them, plus I don't want to get sued, or worse. Journalist A.C. Thompson, now with ProPublica, wrote about the Murphy case in 2004 for the San Francisco Bay Guardian. He offers his opinions based on his reporting. I had asked him for what he remembered about the 2 lead characters in this case, Gary and Grandma. He framed the personalities, especially Grandma's.
for me, there were always two compelling pieces to this story, and one was the victim and his character, and like, was this guy a dude who was really trying to pull his life together, and then had it snuffed out before he could do that, and that seemed to be an interesting story. But the other thing that was super compelling about it was that the prime suspect in his murder did not seem to fit the typical profile. So you would think of Gary Murphy as being the guy who is likely to be the violent criminal. He's a guy who ran with the Hells Angels, was super heavily tattooed, had been in the drug trade, looked pretty gnarly, and had done a bunch of prison time. But the person that seemed to be the prime suspect, who was quite possibly responsible for his murder, was a grandma. She was this affluent white lady grandma who seemed to live a fairly comfortable life in a nice neighborhood in Oakland, and was helping to raise her very young granddaughter. And her very young granddaughter was Gary Murphy's daughter. And the prime suspect's daughter had been Gary Murphy's wife or girlfriend and had died of a drug overdose. And so here you had grandma, possibly grandma the killer, who had possibly hired a hitman to kill her daughter's ex. And then you had the victim, who's this gnarly biker guy. And it just seemed like a crazy, crazy story. Look, when people die violently, there's always suspicion, there's always rumors, there's always people say, like, oh, well, here's the 5 people who would have had a reason to want that person dead. And generally, that's just bullshit speculation. But when it came to the prime suspect in this case, that person had what appeared to be a deep and abiding hatred for Gary Murphy, that she seemed to blame Gary Murphy for the overdose death of her daughter, seemed to blame Gary Murphy for the fact that she was now a grandma who was raising a very young daughter, and seemed to be not right in the head. The prime suspect seemed to be someone that was constantly having absolutely crazy interactions with other people, did not get along well with others, did not play well with others. So, she had allegedly threatened to do great harm to her ex-husband. She had allegedly threatened to do great harm to somebody that ran a preschool, and had allegedly left a voodoo doll for the preschool manager, and basically threatened that person, and seemed to be just off the hook crazy.
I will now examine Grandma. She's still alive and lives in a nice house in the Oakland Hills. It's odd that she never had much official income from cutting hair, but wound up always living in nice houses in posh suburbs. She hails from Nova Scotia and moved to the Bay Area probably in the 80s. She and her second husband had 2 boys and a daughter. The daughter who gave birth to Eden was from a previous marriage. That daughter, Alicia, died of a methadone overdose in Vancouver 3 months after Eden was born. Grandma blamed Murphy, Eden's father, for her daughter's death. Right after Murphy's murder, Grandma moved Eden back to British Columbia for 5 years before, once again, returning to Oakland with the family around 2003. In March 1998, Grandma faxed me and John Azarian, my partner at the time, a 4-page letter, which she wrote in big, bold cursive. By then, she had hired us to get dirt on Gary Murphy, but she soon felt we weren't getting results fast enough. Her letter was an attempt to pit Nazarian and myself against each other. In her letter, Grandma accused me of being upset that Nazarian did not give me enough of the $12,000 she had paid us. For the record, Nazarian paid me $1,000. A price I was fine with due to my level of involvement. Calling me young and naive, Grandma wrote, quote, "Both you, I, and Mike understand the conditions of the contract. It was made real clear. At no time did I ever ask you to kill him. I said I have plan A, B, and C. You stated that you, quote, had connections and guaranteed your work, that you would not take a job unless you were confident. I believed in you and I needed you. I put all my confidence in you and my money. As I recall, I was caught in the middle. I had done the initial surveillance, which didn't yield obvious information that could get Murphy's parole violated and pave the way for her to get custody of Eden. I brought in Nazarian because he was more experienced and did in fact have connections at the time in the San Francisco Police Department. I did not know exactly how Nazarian was proceeding, but I trusted him. I knew he wasn't going to do anything illegal or stupid. Grandma, however, couldn't wait for any real process to play out. I communicated to her then that I didn't know exactly what Nazarian was doing, prompting her missive. The deal was that if Nazarian got Murphy's parole violated by a certain date, she would pay him an $8,000 bonus. She paid us the first $12,000 in cash she kept in a Ritz cracker box in the freezer. Grandma's letter stated that she covertly tape-recorded the meeting that the three of us had at her Trestle Glen residence that day in February 1998. Quote, Mike is the fly in the ointment, and it's all about him wanting more money from me because you did not give him a large enough finder's fee. End quote. What I did tell her was that her initial retainer to me, about $1,000, wasn't large enough if she wanted me to continue doing more surveillance, but she was lashing out at both of us. She continued in the letter that we, quote, took advantage of her emotional state. That for us it was, quote, like taking candy from a baby. She talked about being so stressed by the, quote, unfair situation. She mentioned in the letter that she had an attorney, which she hadn't previously disclosed to us. One part of her letter was accurate. I had, in fact, told her that if she doubted Nazarian's efforts, then it was within her rights to demand an accounting from him about his actions on the case. But the letter was the final straw for us. Nazarian and I independently wrote to her telling her that we were severing our relationship with her because we couldn't deal with her hostility and lies. But that was largely par for Grandma's course, as she fights with people as often as most of us brush our teeth. She's estranged from her other children. I looked into one of her bizarre court cases, where a Montclair District Oakland Children's Center obtained a restraining order against her after she had made several threats. The case started as a contract dispute with the church school, where Grandma had enrolled a young Eden. To paraphrase the movie Anchorman, the situation quickly escalated. I found the former school teacher who sought the restraining order against Grandma. She did not want her name released or want to be recorded, but she vividly remembers the circumstances from 28 years ago and explained, the situation was way more than a contract dispute about money for Eden's daycare. Grandma went to war with all of the school's board members. The Montclair District has always considered itself better than the rest of Oakland. A rough-around-the-edges parent or guardian would be bound to step on toes. The school leader told me that they suspected Grandma of planting dead raccoons under the tires of a teacher's car. She'd leave rapid-fire phone messages, a barrage of hang-up calls, and nasty letters for the school leader. But Grandma would use more professional language when dealing with the school directly. Her communications to the school promised that the dispute would be settled by her son-in-law, Murphy, who she called a, quote, San Quentin parolee. The woman recalled Grandma, quote, said that he was going to show up at the school with a bunch of Hell's Angels on motorcycles. Grandma was always going on and on about her connection to Eden's biker parolee father. But there is no indication that Murphy ever came to the school to threaten anyone. Grandma countered in the case that it was the school that was harassing her. She claimed someone had left a voodoo doll with pins in at her house, that her car had been vandalized, and that someone had composed a ransom note-like letter of cut-out words containing veiled threats against her and saying, quote, "It's over, pig." Eden had been expelled from the school because the bills had not been paid. The school leader said that the situation calmed down after Grandma was served with the papers. She also remembered Eden as, quote, adorable, who stood out from the other children because she was so well dressed. Speaking of Eden, I reached out to her recently.
Pretty good. I moved out of California recently, and that's been a good move so far.
I am assisting her, and she's assisting me by once again trying to pull records on her father's case from the clamped jaws of the San Francisco District Attorney. She learned about the real circumstances of her father's death as a teenager when a friend told her about the 2004 Bay Guardian article. She moved out of Grandma's house after reading the article, then leaving a copy of it on Grandma's pillow. Grandma and the rest of the family always kept her in the dark about her dad and their family. It was her aunt, Gary's sister, who filled her in on some of the details of the death. I marvel at her good attitude and sense of humor. She has a lot of her father in her.
I don't know. I don't know where the strength comes from. I think that's maybe just part of me. What brings my daily joy is the life that I've created for myself. And I feel like I've always been a generally positive person. I like being happy, so that's what I try to be.
As long as she can remember, and to this day, Grandma has kept her signature temper and mood changes.
She was a just very unpredictable. If it wasn't going her way, sometimes even if it was, it's any kind of minor inconvenience or slight dislike. It could send her off. She's very quick tempered. Yeah, it was verbal. It was physical. I mean, with her hands, fists, choking, throwing things at me. I don't know, whatever she could get her hands on that was closest was generally what she would use. But, when I got to be a teenager, I think I started to fight back and she stopped.
Growing up under Grandma was like walking on eggshells. She just didn't know what would cause her to explode and when. After her father's murder, there were a couple times where she would try to drag information out of her. Grandma would never break.
There's been a couple times, and it's never been something that she just volunteered. It's usually something that she'll kind of, if I've brought it up, or in the heat of the moment, she'll almost say something and then catch herself and stop. Unfortunately, I don't remember specifics because I think anytime that she's ever almost said something about it or given me any type of hint, I've been pretty worked up. So, I don't think that I retained, many specifics.
It's hard to imagine an upbringing shrouded in mystery. Not only were the details of her father's death kept from her, but Eden didn't even know what the family did for money. They told her they, quote, grew tomato plants. She constantly got, quote, half answers to any of her significant questions. She does, however, remember always being around pot plants in the homes where she was raised. What was the source of the family wealth, of those nice rental homes and the house in the hills in Oakland? In the restraining orders flying back and forth between Gary and Grandma, Grandma was at her angriest, at least in the documents, when she thought Gary had dropped the dime on her, prompting Oakland police to raid her house for pot plants in the fall of 1997. Weeks before the raid, Grandma had actually written to the court, taking back some of the nasty things she had said about Murphy. She had even expressed that she wanted to work out a custody-sharing situation with him, but the gloves were off after the pot bust, for which she was not arrested. She blamed him for tipping off police, but he denied it. She would then go scorched earth on him until his last moments alive, when shot twice in the back and jumping out a second-story window to try to escape his hitman. The obvious motive is she wanted custody of Eden, and blamed Murphy for her daughter's death. And yet, she complained to the court about having to raise her. Eden certainly didn't feel loved by her. I am speculating, but what if Murphy's knowledge of her, quote, family business was at the root of the murder? Illegal marijuana grows have a long history in California and especially the Bay Area. Gangs and growers take over the suburban houses or urban warehouses all over the state. Law enforcement tends not to do anything about these operations until they become so large that federal agents get involved. Where you have these grows, you also have illegal firearms and lots of cash. California didn't have legal pot until 2016. Murphy knew that Grandma had a gun and her son's pit bull in a home where Eden lived. Grandma was moving in and out of houses like every year or two in the 1990s. In March 2006, authorities searched several homes in the Bay Area, including Berkeley and Oakland, seizing about 6,000 marijuana plants, 117 pounds of pot packaged for sale, and $120,000 in cash. Grandma's two sons were among the 7 men arrested following a 5-month investigation by the Drug Enforcement Administration and Berkeley Police. One son was facing about 5 years, and the other, charged with multiple counts of cultivation, was facing perhaps 20 years in prison. It's interesting that Grandma had bought her house in the Oakland Hills just prior to the bust, but it was not one of the houses police searched. The son, who was the ringleader and now 48 years old, bought 2 Oakland properties that authorities would raid in 2001 and 2004. It's not bad for a 20-something with no real work history. But the big question remains. Where had the family been getting all this money? In the federal complaint, one witness said that all she had ever seen the 2 brothers do was, quote, grow and sell marijuana and count cash. One person in the case said that the pot was sold for about $3,000 a pound. Police confiscated 13 firearms at the various properties and seemed to have a rock-solid case, including Mirandized statements from some of the lesser players. The one brother had a Bushmaster AR-15 type rifle at his residence when he was arrested. The complaint noted that he had a prior felony, though it was a car theft from when he was 15. Also, considering that a grow operation of this magnitude takes years of practice and lots of money to establish and operate, Grandma was likely in on it. But neither of the sons did any prison time. According to the federal court records I saw, Grandma's 2 sons and the others, big and small players, each got like 3 years probation. The Fed seized about $90,000 cash from her son, but he got to keep his houses. Guns, cash, and hundreds of pounds of weed, and no one goes up the river? I might know why. They had to have snitched in exchange for their light sentences. That's just how it works. Before they were each sentenced, a flurry of, quote, sealed documents appeared for each in the court dockets. I know how the sausage is made because I have sat in on the calls where the U.S. attorney and an FBI or DEA agent grill the defendant, who has his attorney and investigator on the call. The 2 sides negotiate the plea deal. If a defendant is so much as caught in one lie, the feds revoke the deal. Giving up information about other crimes and criminals is standard in these negotiations. The only pre-sentencing report not sealed is for one of Grandma's sons, whose attorney portrayed him as a minor player. The document gave nuggets about Grandma's family. And she lied her ass off in the letter to the court about her son, which was used as a court exhibit. There were lies of omission. The attorney and Grandma depict the son as a lost soul who turned to drugs and alcohol after several family tragedies and a, quote, perfect storm of events. The first alleged blow was the Oakland Hills fire in 1991, destroying their home with the family losing everything.
5 years of drought and just the right weather conditions today combined to feed an explosion of fire, the biggest firestorm to hit the East Bay in memory. pushed by 30-mile-an-hour winds.
The Hills fire destroyed about 3,000 homes in under 48 hours. I covered it as a reporter. The second blow was the death of his sister, Alicia, who was also Eden's mother. Alicia had a history of psychiatric disorders, including several hospitalizations, and went to live with relatives in Vancouver. The young mother was bipolar. She died from the methadone overdose just a few months after Eden's birth. The final blow the attorney cited in the court filing was Grandma ending her second marriage by having an affair with a family friend. Quote, "There was a strong sense of betrayal." The attorney goes on to say that because of her daughter's death, Grandma had to spend a lot of time in Canada on the wrongful death malpractice case against her daughter's doctor, which she won. Grandma was also fighting the custody battle for Eden and basically dropped out of family life, the attorney said. Her son got into drugs and later alcohol at the time around the huge pop bust. The 2000 letter from Grandma to the court is the side of her that is rational and presents well, a 180 compared to what she sent P.I. Nazarian. It's a 2-paged typed letter with good flow, grammar, and facts about her son. It began with her calling out the jail and prison system for not adequately treating prisoners for mental disorders and substance abuse. It was kind of an odd start. She then claimed that she had been employed by various organizations throughout the years to help state and federal inmates. Quote, "I have had first-hand experience seeing the fallout of lives shattered, families torn apart, and the hopelessness that comes from incarceration." That was a bit much for me, considering the fallout of 2 San Quentin ex-cons she very likely paid to kill her granddaughter's dad. Maybe she met and knew the killers from her work with prisoners. Maybe she met her then boyfriend at San Quentin, where he had done 3 stints for auto theft. Grandma stated in the letter that bipolar and addiction runs in her family, with half of her 12 siblings having these disorders. She did not disclose whether she was bipolar. Grandma said that she moved to Victoria for 6 years in 1998 to, quote, "educate and raise my granddaughter at an all-girls school," and even noted her son's time in private schools in the Bay Area. Again, I couldn't help but wonder, what was the source of this money for private schools? The one son who was the purported minor player in the case, the one with the AR-15, he caught another pot-growing felony in 2013 and did about 6 months in county jail. In 2020, he pulled a handgun on her in her home and was arrested for it. She obtained a restraining order against him, but it was dropped because she didn't show up in court. As if in competition, the other son was arrested July 4th, 2022, for possession of an assault rifle and endangering a minor. Lawsuits bookended Grandma's move to and from Canada after Gary Murphy was murdered on June 12, 1998. She bought a house in Victoria just 3 months after the hit for about $400,000, but she squabbled with the seller over $20,000, sued, and lost. On her way back to the East Bay in 2003, she fought with a landscaper over $13,000 when she was selling the house. She did her trademark complaint of the work wasn't done fast enough, and that the gardener violated the contract. The landscaper offered to refund her the money at one point, noting that she always seemed, quote, agitated. The judge ruled against her. Always fighting, always the combatant. Her granddaughter knows this side of her all too well. In my recent talk with Eden, we discussed what a version of justice might look like for Grandma. Eden is torn. She wants police to care and to share the details of her father's death with her and her father's siblings. She wants the full story of the conspiracy.
I don't know if it's something about, my dad's lifestyle or laziness or, just something else. I don't know. The amount of neglect of this case is not very surprising to me anymore, just because it's been something that, finding any little tiny piece of information has just been so hard. I don't know how many years, since I kind of had this hunch. I've been trying to find little bits of information, and you're the only person who has found anything.
Eden wrestles with what she wants to happen in the case and is ambivalent about seeing her grandmother prosecuted.
I go back and forth about that constantly. I think I do want authorities to, be honest about what happened, and I want to know. I've always wanted to know what actually happened. As far as charges, I'm not sure about that one. I've been thinking about it for a while. I do want to know who is responsible, and I do want to know all the facts behind it. I want to know if this was something that she hired, and yeah.
Like me, she's disappointed with the police response to her father's death 25 years ago.
I've always known that she was responsible. I think I just want concrete evidence and all the information, and why did the police just ignore this case, and why was nothing done?
At the end of our conversation, after I stopped recording, Eden disclosed another reason why she's ambivalent about wanting to see her grandmother brought to justice. Grandma now has Alzheimer's disease, a progressive condition that destroys memory and other important mental functions. This disclosure floors me. When I started this project, I thought maybe I could come up with new evidence to compel the district attorney to charge her with the murder. I had imagined a Mike Wallace 60 Minutes ambush attempted interview of her in her driveway. I am now certain this will likely never happen. In a way, I suppose that with this illness, Grandma is in a form of prison for the rest of her life. It's certainly karmic justice. My name is Mike Spencer. I'm a private investigator. If you have any information about this case, feel free to text or call me at 510-593-3767. Information will be held in the strictest confidence. Thanks to this show's producer, Brian Kranz, and researcher Angela Rowan, and court searches by Cusick & Cusick Private Investigators of Vancouver. The show's theme music is by Chris Oprisco. In the next episode, I explore how the police investigation unraveled and provide more details about the other suspects, linked by their time as San Quentin prison inmates. Also in the next show, I speak with a retired Alameda County District Attorney's investigator involved in serving the search warrant at the suspected gunman's residence in Oakland.